How much pollen is in our air?
Pollen from plants just within American borders produce about 2 billion pounds of particulates every year, or about 7 pounds per person.
Who was the snowflake man?
American photographer and farmer Wilson A. Bentley, 1865 to 1931, was nicknamed the Snowflake Man, or just Snowflake Bentley, because he photographed images of over 2,400 snowflakes. His stunning photo collection capturing the natural beauty of snowflakes was published in 1931. Snow crystals. Needles look just like the name, thin, long ice crystals. They usually form when the temperature is about 23 degrees Fahrenheit -5 degrees Celsius. Triangular crystals often form at temperatures of about 28 degrees Fahrenheit -2 degrees Celsius, and are rather like deformed stellar flakes where half the arms are not fully formed, creating a triangle shape as a result. Bullet rosettes happen when several columns melt and freeze together, looking like several crystal bullets merged at the heads at odd angles to each other. Rimmed crystals occur when additional water droplets freeze onto already formed snowflakes, giving them a fuzzy appearance. Irregular crystals are snowflakes that are a rather disorganized mess of multiple snowflakes that have broken up and melted together.
What are the Santa Ana wines?
When a high-pressure system forms over the Great Basin, usually during the fall, it pushes air masses downwards, causing compression that results in winds in California that elevate temperatures upwards of 100 degrees Fahrenheit 38 degrees Celsius. These winds can reach speeds well over 75 miles, 120 kilometers per hour in many cases, blowing down into the densely populated coastal regions. The dry winds of the Santa Ana help create conditions that make brush fires in the hills around Los Angeles and other cities much more likely. In fact, one of the most disastrous fires in California's history, known as the Cedar Fire, occurred in October 2003 as a result of strong Santa Ana winds. The fire destroyed 721,791 acres, 2,921 square kilometers, of land and burned 3,640 homes to the ground.
Is a polar low like an Arctic hurricane?
Some strong hurricanes such as 1992's Hurricane Andrew have continued to be active while traveling as far north as the Arctic. But at that point they are no longer considered tropical storms or hurricanes. There is also something called a polar low, which is like a small hurricane that can form above the Arctic Circle. Polar lows, extratropical lows, tend to range from 50 to 250 miles, 100 to 500 kilometers in diameter, versus tropical hurricanes that are easily twice as big in many cases. Not only are they smaller, but polar lows tend to have a shorter lifespan than southern hurricanes, rarely lasting more than 36 hours and more typically only about 12 hours. However, they can still be very intense, generating strong winds and heavy snowfalls.
What is the mission of NASA's Aura satellite?
Launched on July 15, 2004, the Aura satellite is on a mission to monitor changes in the Earth's atmosphere, particularly the ozone layer. Instruments on the satellite measure the chemistry and dynamics of the upper atmosphere. The data it will gather will be used to predict alterations in air quality and climate change.
How do meteorologists predict weather using changes in air pressure?
Meteorologists can forecast many details about the weather based on barometric readings. Generally, changes in air pressure indicate the following. Decreasing pressure foretells rainy, windy, stormy weather. Small, quick drops in pressure are good indicators that short periods of wind and rain will follow. Slow, moderate drops in pressure indicate a low-pressure system is in the area, but this will not likely cause severe weather. Slowly decreasing pressure over a longer period of time foreshadows poor weather that will last for some time. Slowly decreasing pressure that was preceded by high pressure means that poor weather will be particularly bad. Increasing pressure is an indication of dry, colder weather. Slow, large rises in pressure mean that good weather is approaching and will likely last a long time. Rapidly rising pressure when the pressure is already low is a good indicator of upcoming fair weather. Rapidly decreasing pressure is a good prediction that a storm will hit within 6 hours.
Is it true that being hit by lightning can have health benefits?
There have been some documented cases where people who were legally blind were hit by lightning and, indeed, found out afterwards that they had regained their vision. There are also a few cases where victims of lightning bolts found out that they did better on intelligence tests afterwards. Indeed, some have even claimed that they have gained psychic abilities.
How bright is lightning?
The light from a lightning bolt is equal to the amount of illumination from about 100 million light bulbs.
What is radon?
Radon is actually a naturally occurring radioactive gas that is emitted from ground sources of decaying uranium and radium. It only becomes a dangerous hazard within man-made structures, such as private homes, where the radon can seep into basements and build up to harmful, carcinogenic concentrations. Lung cancer is one of the primary potential threats of radon poisoning. The government standard for safe levels of radon is under 4 picocuries per liter, which is roughly the equivalent of smoking a half pack of cigarettes per day. Because it is impossible to say which homes are more at risk for radon pollution than others, it is best to install radon detectors in the home. If a problem is detected, it can usually be solved by simple basement repairs or improving ventilation systems.
What is atmospheric physics?
A complementary field of study to atmospheric chemistry is atmospheric physics. This discipline has to do with such issues as wave and particle physics, acoustics, spectroscopy, optics, and more. A strong command of mathematics is needed for anyone wishing to specialize in this field. The theoretical work involved has applications in satellite, radar, LiDAR, and other technologies.
What is the National Weather Center, NWC?
The NWC is a partnership between the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, state organizations, and the University of Oklahoma. It is a scientific endeavor to better understand the weather, especially on a macro scale involving long periods of time and all levels of the atmosphere.
What unique weapon was employed during World War I?
During the war to end all wars, avalanches were deliberately triggered in some battles in Europe as a weapon. Estimates are that between 40,000 and 80,000 soldiers died as a result.
What are the most polluted cities in the world in terms of air quality?
The most severe air pollution can be found in the following cities: Cairo, Egypt; Delhi, India; Calcutta, India; Tianjin, China; Chongqing, China; Kanpur, India; Lucknow, India; Jakarta, Indonesia; and Shenyang, China.
How does lightning work?
The anatomy of a lightning stroke is surprisingly complex. For lightning to occur, of course, there needs to be a source of electricity, an electrical storm. Thunderstorms contain clouds that work like capacitors. The tops of the clouds have a positive charge and the bottoms are negatively charged. Scientists believe that this electrical charge may build up as the result of electrons being exchanged by particles within the clouds as they collide with one another due to temperature differences within the cloud, though just how this happens is a matter of debate. As the difference between the positively charged cloud tops and negatively charged bottoms increases, an electric field is generated. As the charge within the cloud builds, it has an effect on the surface of the Earth directly below, as well as objects on top of the ground. The negative field on the bottoms of the clouds repels electrons on the ground, which in turn causes the land below the storm to become positively charged. As the charge builds and builds, the air between Earth and cloud becomes ionized air molecules. Break down into electrons and positively charged ions transitioning into a plasma state. This plasma now serves as a conductor between the clouds and the ground below, or to other clouds, or into the surrounding air. Next, the cloud sends out step leaders, which are precursors to the oncoming flash of lightning. Think of them as ionized paths and streams of electrons that are like feelers that the cloud sends out, searching for the best path for the lightning bolt to flow through. Sometimes they may be visible as faintly glowing purplish streaks. Meanwhile, as the step leaders are sending exploring fingers outward, the positively charged ground or other receiving object is sending out feelers upwards. These feelers, called positive streamers, don't always connect with the step leaders. But when they do, the circuit is completed and the fireworks are ready to begin. Positive streamers can emerge from any inanimate or living object, including people. Like railway workers completing a railroad. Once the two ends of the path join, the train can drive through. This is the lightning bolt, an explosion of energy that occurs as nature attempts to equalize the charge between cloud and surface.
Can lightning travel through the ground?
Yes. When lightning reaches the ground, the electrical energy can travel through the ground from some distance away. If you are standing nearby, the energy can then enter through your feet. This is also how multiple people or animals can be injured by a single lightning bolt.
What are growlers?
Growlers are pieces of floating ice that have broken off from an iceberg.
How are supercooled droplets used for the purpose of cloud seeding?
Cloud seeding is a method for encouraging rain droplets to form in clouds. An experiment was conducted in 1946 by chemist and meteorologist Vincent Schaefer, 1906 to 1993, and physicist, chemist, and Nobel laureate Irving Langmuir, 1881 to 1957, in which dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide, at -109 degrees Fahrenheit -78 degrees Celsius was placed inside a cloud chamber containing cloud droplets chilled to -40 degrees Fahrenheit -40 degrees Celsius. The result was that rain droplets formed. The next step was to conduct the experiment in a real-life situation. In the winter of 1946, Schaefer and Langmuir had dry ice placed in an airplane, which then dumped the load into a bank of stratocumulus clouds. They were pleased to see success when the dry ice caused a snow flurry to develop. American physicist Bernard Vonnegut, 1914 to 1997, who also worked with Schaefer, later experimented with other chemicals to see what else would be an effective way to seed clouds. He found that silver iodide, which is still used today, could perform the task well. Since then, other substances have been used to seed clouds, including sea salt and even water droplets. However, all these methods appear to work best in the winter. During warmer months, seeding clouds has proved to be more problematic, because the correct conditions to produce precipitation are less common.
Why is it wetter on one side of a mountain range?
It's much more wet on one side of a mountain than the other, because of a process known as orographic precipitation. Orographic precipitation causes air to rise up the side of a mountain range and cool, creating precipitation and storms. The storms deposit a great deal of precipitation on that side of the mountain and create a rain shadow effect on the opposite side of the range. The Sierra Nevada mountains are an excellent example of orographic precipitation, because the mountains of the western Sierras receive considerable rainfall, far more than California's Central Valley, while the eastern Sierras of Nevada are quite dry.
How long a path do tornadoes typically make?
Most tornadoes actually have fairly brief lifespans, lasting less than an hour and often only several minutes or seconds. About 5 miles of travel can be expected from an average tornado. Of course, there have been much longer-lived tornadoes, such as one on March 18, 1925, which crossed 215 miles, 346 kilometers, of terrain.
How much pollution is caused by smoking tobacco?
A 2004 study concluded that cigarette smoking released 10 times the amount of particulate pollution in the United States as was caused by diesel exhaust. Indoor pollution. from smoking has been in the news a lot lately because the smoke is much more concentrated indoors, causing health problems even to those who refrain from the habit.
How destructive was the blizzard of 1996?
The blizzard of 1996 left a path of destruction from Georgia to Pennsylvania. Almost $600 million in insurance claims were filed and 187 people lost their lives. 2 or more feet of snow covered Washington, D.C., West Virginia, New England, and New York City. In addition, about $700 million in flood damage was reported in Pennsylvania. Altogether, this one storm cost $3 billion.
What place holds the record for the least amount of rain on Earth?
From October 1903 to January 1918, Arica, Chile, received no measurable rainfall.
Does lightning only occur during thunderstorms?
Almost always, lightning is associated with thunderstorms. There are a few extraordinary cases, though, where lightning has been observed without storm clouds present. Sometimes, for example, erupting volcanoes can produce smoke plumes that generate the electrical current necessary for lightning. Even more rarely, smoke from severe fires can mimic these conditions, as well.
What is eutrophication?
Eutrophication is the excessive buildup of nutrients in lakes, ponds, and other water bodies as a result of river and stream runoff containing pollution from fertilizer, sewage, and other waste products. While more nutrients in the water might at first sound like a good thing, it actually has harmful side effects, such as algae blooms that deplete water of oxygen and kill off aquatic species and other wildlife. Factory farms and private residents who fertilize their lawns are major culprits of this type of pollution. If you live by a fresh water source, such as a pond or stream, you can lessen the negative effects of runoff by creating a natural plant barrier between your lawn and the water. Among the plants that make ideal buffers are willow trees, birch, green ash, red maples, buttonbush, spice bush, some dogwood species, water oak and pin, sycamore, and smooth alder. These and other plants absorb the excess nutrients while also preventing erosion.
What is UVA and UVB radiation?
VA and UVB are two categories within the ultraviolet range. UV radiation has a wavelength between 320 and 400 nanometers. And UVB has a range of 290 to 320 nanometers. The more energetic UVB radiation is considered more dangerous to people, as it can lead to malignant melanomas. UVA can also potentially cause cancer, but is more likely to just cause unsightly wrinkles and leathery skin. This is why dermatologists and other physicians always recommend using sunscreen to prevent damage from ultraviolet radiation.
Can you see a tornado using Doppler radar?
No. Doppler radar can tell meteorologists if conditions within a storm are favorable for tornadoes, such as strong winds and cloud rotation, but it can't actually see a tornado.
What me scattering?
German physicist Gustav Adolf Pfeiffer Wilhelm Me, 1868 to 1957, discovered how small particles in the atmosphere scatter light waves. Called Me scattering, this effect is important to meteorologists. Studying how clouds and haze scatter light, meteorological optics.
How do factory farms contribute to air pollution?
One of the debates currently raging between environmentalists and the agricultural industry concerns factory farms. These are large, usually corporate-owned facilities in which there are high concentrations of livestock, or where vast areas of cropland contribute to fertilizer runoff. When it comes to air pollution, such farms are a major contributor to the problem. So much animal waste is generated by factory farms that large lagoons filled with manure and urine have to be built to maintain all of it. Some of this liquid manure is dispersed by spraying it onto crops as fertilizer. But that doesn't really help the issue. These wastes generate large amounts of noxious pollutants, including ammonia gas, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, as well as carbon dioxide. Such gases contribute to acid rain and ozone depletion. In addition, livestock flatulence, to put it bluntly, burping and farting cows, is another source of methane gas. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, 20% of methane gas generated by human civilization comes from agricultural activities.
What is the Fujiwara effect?
Named after Japanese meteorologist Sakahei Fujiwara, 1884 to 1950, the Fujiwara effect is what happens when two hurricanes come close enough to each other that they begin to rotate around a common central point. For this to occur, the two storms generally need to come to within 300 to 900 miles. 500 to 1,500 kilometers, of each other. They also need to be of about equal strength to remain in this partnered dance. Or else the stronger storm tends to swallow up the smaller storm.
From where do comets originate?
Most of the comets that orbit the Sun originate in the Kuiper belt or the Oort cloud. Two major zones in our solar system beyond the orbit of Neptune. Short-period comets usually originate in the Kuiper belt. Some comets and comet-like objects, however, have even smaller orbits. They may have once come from the Kuiper belt and Oort cloud, but have had their orbital paths altered by gravitational interactions with Jupiter and the other planets.
What is an urban ice slab?
Just as urban areas can cause problems related to heat, they also can make winters more hazardous. When ice forms on skyscrapers and other tall buildings, a dangerous situation may arise upon thawing. Large sheets of ice have been known to break off of structures and plummet to the streets below. One notable case of this happening occurred in Chicago, Illinois, in April 1995. When the danger of urban ice slabs dropping onto Michigan Avenue compelled authorities to close the street for hours.
What are black smokers?
Black smokers are actually deep ocean hydrothermal, hot water, vents, named after the dark, soot-like material ejected from chimney formations on the ocean floor. The material is actually superheated water, around 662 degrees Fahrenheit 350 degrees Celsius, with very high concentrations of dissolved minerals, mostly sulfur-bearing minerals or sulfides from lava on a mid-ocean ridge volcano. As the hot water meets the cold ocean waters, the minerals precipitate out, settling out around the surrounding rock. Over time, the hollowed-out chimneys grow taller as more minerals precipitate out. Black smokers tend to occur in volcanic vent fields that are typically tens of yards across, with fields ranging from pool table size 43 square feet 4 square meters, to tennis court size 8,288 square feet 770 square meters. For example, vent fields are found on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, a mid-ocean ridge in the Pacific Ocean. Many vents have been discovered since the first site was found in 1977 near the Galapagos Islands. In the small research submersible Alvin, and there are probably many more. But scientists have only explored a small portion of the Earth's mid-ocean ridges.
What was the Donora smog disaster of 1948?
One of the most shameful chapters in environmental history occurred on October 30 and 31, 1948, in the industrial town of Donora in Washington County, Pennsylvania. The 14,000 residents were mostly supported by steel mills, which found a location by the Monongahela River just 30 miles, 48 kilometers, from Pittsburgh to be ideal. The mills provided good-paying jobs, but the blast furnaces they used produced massive quantities of soot, sulfur dioxide, and other pollutants. In addition, the town was home to a zinc smelting plant and a sulfuric acid plant. As if that weren't enough, the natural climate of the town made foggy weather a regular occurrence. The industry combined with the weather during a horrible Halloween season in 1948, creating such thick brown air that it was nearly impossible to see where one was going. 500 of the residents fell ill from various respiratory problems and 22 people died. 17 from complications from asthma or heart disease, and 2 from tuberculosis aggravated by the filthy air.
Has lightning ever happened during a snowstorm?
Yes, it is possible to have lightning and thunder when it is snowing. In fact, winter storms have been known to produce very powerful lightning strokes.
What is a flash flood?
Floods can happen relatively gradually, such as when water slowly rises over the banks of a river or lake. Or suddenly, such as when a dam or levee is damaged. When a flood happens quickly, it's called a flash flood.
What is the hottest place in the United States?
The most inhospitably hot and dry place in America is Death Valley in Eastern California. Also the lowest place, at 280 feet below sea level, Death Valley regularly experiences temperatures in the 120s Fahrenheit, high 40s to low 50s Celsius, and higher. And the valley sees temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit 37.8 degrees Celsius between 140 and 160 days every year, even in the shade. The record high here has been tallied at 134 degrees Fahrenheit 56.7 degrees Celsius. Annual rainfall in Death Valley is less than 2 inches, 50 millimeters.
Where is the rainiest place on Earth?
The wettest place in the world, in terms of total rainfall, is Mawzinram, India, which drowns in 468 inches, 1,188 centimeters, of rain each year, mostly because of monsoon rains. Nearby is Cherrapunji, India, which receives 460 inches, 1,170 centimeters, of rain. Second place, though, goes to Tutunundu, Colombia. Here, the average annual rainfall is 463.4 inches, 1,177 centimeters. Unofficially, Laro, Colombia, endures 523 inches, 1,328 centimeters of rain annually, but no verified measurements have been taken to confirm this claim.
What is a comet?
Comets are basically snowy dirt balls or dirty snowballs, clumpy collections of rocky material, dust, and frozen water, methane, and ammonia that move through the solar system in long, highly elliptical orbits around the Sun. When they are far away from the Sun, comets are simple, solid bodies, but when they get closer to the Sun, they warm up, causing the ice in the comet's outer surface to vaporize. This creates a cloudy coma that forms around the solid part of the comet, called the nucleus. The loosened comet vapor forms long tails that can grow to millions of miles in length.
How much does it rain in the Amazonian rainforest?
The largest rainforest in the world surrounds the Amazon River basin, most of which lies within the borders of Brazil. Here, the average rainfall is 80 inches, 200 centimeters, annually. Interestingly, despite all the rain and thick forest growth, the soil in the Amazon region is quite sterile and not well suited to farming.
What is a mesocyclone?
A mesocyclone is the vortex of air usually between 1 to 6 miles, 2 to 10 kilometers in diameter, often found within a supercell or other large thunderstorm with cumulonimbus clouds. Wind shear resulting in abrupt changes in wind direction or speed in the storm causes air to circulate in a rolling fashion parallel to the ground. An updraft can then orient the swirling air vertically, thus forming a vortex perpendicular to the ground.
What methods have been used to try to remove hazardous fog?
Helicopters have been used in the past to try and blow away fog. And in France, people have used jet engines at airports to heat up the air. Both of these methods are very impractical, however.
How are different types of climates classified?
The German-born, Russian climatologist Vladimir Koppen, 1846 to 1940, developed a climate classification system that is still used today, albeit with some modifications. He classified climates into 6 categories: tropical humid, dry, mid-latitude, severe mid-latitude, polar, and highland. He also created subcategories for 5 of these classifications. His climate map is often found in geography texts and atlases. In 1931, American geographer and climatologist Charles Warren Thornthwaite (1899 to 1963) published The Climates of North America, according to a new classification, which takes into more thorough consideration how differences in geography affect local climates.
What is a hectopascal?
A hectopascal, HPA, is the same thing as a millibar. Some meteorologists, especially outside the United States, use hectopascals instead of millibars or inches of mercury because the HPA is the International System of Units, SI, standard.
About how many tornadoes are recorded in the United States annually?
A typical tornado season sees about 800 tornadoes in the United States. However, better observational techniques, including advanced Doppler radar and growing numbers of tornado chasers, has led to increases in tornado observations since around 1990. So this official average might go up.
How do some animals appear to be able to predict an oncoming storm?
There is a considerable amount of folklore and old wives' tales about how to predict the weather based on animal behavior. On the other hand, there do, in fact, seem to be ways one can tell if a storm is approaching, just by observing animals. Biologists and other scientists, as well as other people who work with animals daily, have noted some truth to the following: geese tend not to fly when a storm is nearing. One explanation for this is that air pressure drops when foul weather approaches, and it might be harder for some larger birds, such as Canada geese, to get off the ground in such conditions. More likely, though, is that the birds instinctively understand that lower air pressure is a good indication of an upcoming storm. Seagulls and other ocean birds also tend to remain grounded before bad weather ensues. Many farmers believe that cows stay away from hilltops and remain close together in herds. Similar behavior has also been observed among deer and elk. Because frogs like it moist and humid, which tends to be the case during and just before stormy weather, they remain out of the water for longer periods of time. You can tell because they are croaking and ribbiting a lot more before it rains. Mosquitoes and biting black flies tend to bite and suck blood with much more ferocity and urgency before bad weather, perhaps saving up so they don't go hungry while they seek shelter from the storm.
Do hailstones have rings?
Yes, but unlike with trees, the rings do not indicate the age of the hailstone. Italian physicist Alessandro Volta, 1745 to 1827, did a study in 1806 to analyze the bands. He concluded that hailstones, before they fall to the ground, may change elevation a number of times due to up and down drafts. As the temperature and moisture levels change, layers of ice accumulate on an embryo nucleus, at different rates, thus forming the layers.
Who else formed theories that ice ages occur in cycles?
Before Milankovic, French mathematician Joseph Hadamard, 1797 to 1862, published his book Revolutions of the Sea in 1842. In it, he suggested ice ages occur in 22,000 year cycles that matched the precession of the equinoxes. Scottish geologist James Krall, 1821 to 1890, later elaborated on this theory. However, scientists did not know enough about the history of ice ages to compare this theory with actual data. And so the hypothesis languished for another century.
What countries are threatened the most from rising sea levels and may cease to exist in the 21st century?
Low-lying island nations of the Pacific and Indian Oceans are most at risk. Most notably Tuvalu and the Maldives. Other candidates for severe flooding and reclamation of coastal land by the impending sea include Bangladesh, India, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and China, affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people.
What are tornadoes?
Tornadoes are very powerful, yet tiny storms that have destructive winds capable of leveling buildings and other structures. Winds in a tornado form a dark gray column of air, though white, bluish, or even red is possible, depending on how the sun's light rays might be reflecting off the tornado, with the center of the tornado acting like a vacuum, picking up objects and moving them along the storm's path. Tornadoes can last from a few minutes to an hour or more. They are one of the most destructive forces in nature, with the largest tornadoes sometimes having diameters of over 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, and wreaking a path of destruction over 100 miles, 160 kilometers, long.
What newspaper was the first to begin publishing daily weather forecasts?
The London Times was the first newspaper to publish daily weather forecasts in 1860. The forecasts were originally written by retired Admiral Robert Fitzroy, 1805 to 1865, who at the time was head of the meteorological department at the Board of Trade. The early reports concerned temperature, air pressure, and rainfall. Beginning in 1861, storm forecasts were added.
What are the wet bulb and dry bulb temperatures?
Taking a reading of the wet bulb temperature is a way of measuring humidity. It is the temperature of a volume of air that has been cooled adiabatically until the humidity is at 100% and then compressed to the original pressure of the SYS temp prior to cooling. Using a wet bulb thermometer provides one reading, while a dry bulb thermometer is used for the second reading. The greater the difference between the temperatures read on the two thermometers, the less humid the air is. Using the two in conjunction is a single device called a psychrometer. The psychrometer measures the difference between the wet and dry bulb. And then, using established tables, the humidity of the air can be calculated.
What are thermographs and hygrothermographs?
A thermograph is a device that records changes in temperature over time by drawing a line over a rotating chart in a manner similar to a seismograph. A hygrothermograph does the same thing, except it also indicates levels of humidity.
Who was that?
Dutch chemist Martinus van Marum, 1750 to 1837, discovered ozone around the year 1785. While conducting experiments with electricity. As many high school science students now do. Van Marum smelled a distinctive odor while working with oxygen and electricity. Van Marum, who is also credited with discovering carbon monoxide, did not, however, identify the source of the odor as a unique gas molecule. It was not until 1840 that German-Swiss chemist Christian Friedrich Schonbein, 1799 to 1868, correctly identified ozone as a gas, which he named after the Greek ozeon, meaning smell. Finally, Swiss chemist J. L. Sarret worked out its chemical structure as being a molecule consisting of three bonded oxygen atoms, O3.
What is the Arctic Oscillation?
Arctic oscillation is a measure of the differences in air pressure between air within the Arctic Circle and air that is between the circle and about 55 degrees north longitude. The Arctic oscillation can be either positive Air pressure is lower over the Arctic region, or negative, the air pressure is higher. In the case of the former, winds become stronger across mid-latitude regions. Eurasia becomes warmer, and drier conditions prevail in the American West and the Mediterranean. Also, storms move farther north into Alaska and northern Europe. When the Arctic oscillation is negative, the opposite is mainly true. And the American West Coast and the Mediterranean experience wet weather, while Eurasia cools.
What is the Wolf number?
Swiss astronomer Johann Rudolf Wolf, 1816–1893. Devised a system for counting sunspots in 1848. The Wolf number is named in his honor. Astronomers count sunspots from various observation points across the globe. Then average those counts to come up with the official Wolf number for that period.
What is pose?
POSE is an acronym for Polar Operational Environmental Satellite. These are the successors to the TIROS satellites. And they are thus called the Advanced Television Infrared Observation Satellites, ATN or TIROS-N. Like the GOES, there are two POSE operated by the U.S. Department of Defense's Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center in what is called the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. The POSE orbit the Earth at elevations ranging from 515 to 540 miles, 830 to 870 kilometers. In altitude, with one crossing the equator at 7:30 a.m. and 1:40 p.m. Data is then transmitted to stations located at Wallops Island, Virginia, and in Fairbanks, Alaska.
What is the National Climatic Data Center, NCDC?
Part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NCDC serves as a vast archive of meteorological data called the World Data Center for Meteorology, which it then provides to various agencies, organizations, publications, insurance companies, and law firms all over the planet. Records go back as far as the 19th century, and include data ranging from modern radar and weather balloon reports to observations made by ships over a century ago. The Meteorology Data Center is located in Asheville, North Carolina. The NCDC also runs the World Data Center for Paleoclimatology in Boulder, Colorado.
What, then, is hydrometeorology?
Hydrometeorology is an 8-syllable word meaning the study of the exchange of water between the lower atmosphere and the land below it.
Are stories about fish, frogs, and insects raining down from the skies real?
While the old saw about raining cats and dogs is just an expression, there have been reliable reports of very strange rains during which people are pummeled by frogs, grasshoppers, fish, and other bizarre creatures. For instance, in 1873 it was reported in a Scientific American article that frogs fell from the sky during a storm in Kansas City, Missouri. Both frogs and toads rained down on Minneapolis, Minnesota. During a 1901 storm, more recently, in 1995, a frog storm was reported in Sheffield, England. One possible explanation for amphibian rain is waterspouts carrying frogs and toads up into the air, where prevailing winds then dump them onto a distant location. The same sort of theory might apply to reports of raining fish. A couple living in Folsom, California, for instance, reported a fish rain in September 2006, and earlier that year a similar eyewitness account came from Manna, India. Scientists were not incredulous, explaining that waterspouts can kick up winds of 200 miles. 320 kilometers per hour that have been known to lift objects as big as sailboats. Other creatures, such as birds and flying insects, have been victims of weird weather, as well. It's not too much of a mental leap to conceive birds being caught in a strong storm that could injure or disorient them, causing them to fall out of the sky. Insects such as grasshoppers and crickets could just as easily be victims of such storms. In 1988, for example, meteorologists speculated that a swarm of red grasshoppers in Africa was caught up in strong winds and blown all the way to the Caribbean, where they landed in a massive insect rain shower.
What is an anticyclone?
Rather than having a low-pressure mass surrounded by swirling air, an anticyclone is an air mass centered around a high-pressure area with air rotating around it in a clockwise manner. In the northern hemisphere, and counterclockwise south of the equator. As with a cyclone, in an anticyclone air rotates faster the greater the difference between the air pressure at the center compared to the surrounding air.
What is the air quality index?
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, developed the Air Quality Index as a measure to better advise citizens of pollutants in the atmosphere. To calculate the index, the EPA takes into account levels of carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. Each pollutant is measured in parts per billion and compared to an acceptable standard over a certain period of time. 24 hours for most pollutants, but ozone is calculated over an 8-hour period. This number is then multiplied by 100 to give the air quality index. In other words, the formula would be pollutant concentration, / pollutant goal concentration, x 100 equals air quality index. The table below explains the different categories in the index.
What is the purpose of a snow fence?
Snow fences are usually installed in places where there is not much in the way of vegetation or buildings to keep winds from blowing and drifting snow. The fences create wind turbulence that prevents drifting downwind of the fence.
What is a diurnal temperature range?
As one might guess from the term, diurnal temperature range means the variation between the lowest and highest temperatures during a given day at a certain location. This can vary widely, depending on the season and place. For example, the climate on the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains in North America has been known to change by as much as 100 degrees within a 24-hour period, while in the tropics temperatures tend to remain more stable, changing by, perhaps, 10 degrees or so within a specific day.
What is radar?
Radar is an acronym for radio detection and ranging, and it uses radio waves to detect objects in the atmosphere. It was first devised in 1904 by the German inventor Christian Hülsmeyer, 1881 to 1957, who called his radar detector a telemobiloscope and patented the device in 1906. The original purpose of his invention was for ships to be able to detect each other so that in poor weather conditions, e.g., heavy fog, they would not run into each other. Sadly, this brilliant invention did not catch on at the time. If it had, some speculate that the 1912 Titanic disaster could have been avoided. Another concept that Hülsmeyer came up with was the remote control. He believed, correctly, that radio waves could be used to turn mechanical devices on and off. Again, people ignored the concept and he never got the credit he deserved.
What is long-range transport?
Long-range transport refers to the fact that winds, especially high-altitude winds, can carry pollutants over incredibly long distances. People once believed that pollutants from sources such as smokestacks might travel a few miles before settling onto the ground and water supplies. Now it is known that these particulates and toxic gases can make their way into the upper atmosphere. Scientists first started to become aware of this issue in the mid-20th century, when nuclear bomb tests resulted in radioactive clouds that would circumnavigate the planet. Acid rain causing chemicals can easily cross the entire United States. And, likewise, pesticides and herbicides travel long distances. Natural air pollutants, such as volcanic ash and organic material like fungi, spores, and pollen, can similarly range over long distances.
What is orbital inclination?
Not only does our planet tilt back and forth and wobble while it's doing it, but it also ranges up and down relative to the invariable plane, the plane. In simplified terms, passing through the solar system's center of mass. If you imagine the Earth's orbit as forming a disk like a CD, then imagine the CD wobbling back and forth instead of spinning on a level plane. Formed by the invariable plane, then you might get the idea of orbital inclination. The current orbital inclination of the Earth causes it to pass through the invariable plane in early January and early July. The invariable plane carries with it more space dust and debris than is found above and below this plane. Thus, as the Earth passes through the invariable plane, the atmosphere comes in contact with more space dust, which means we see more meteor showers and meteorites. The space dust also contributes to cloud formation in the upper atmosphere, noctilucent clouds.
How can a solar eclipse influence the weather?
During a solar eclipse, the moon casts a dark shadow, called the umbra, onto the Earth's surface, as well as a lighter shadow called the penumbra. The umbra can be about 170 miles, 274 kilometers, in diameter, darkening the sky and cooling the air just as if the sun were setting. Temperatures have been known to drop many degrees during a solar eclipse, especially during a total eclipse. For example, in Baja, California, the temperature dropped from 90 degrees Fahrenheit to 74 degrees Fahrenheit. 32 degrees Celsius to 23 degrees Celsius, on July 11, 1991, because of an eclipse. The effect, however, is short-lived, as total eclipses rarely last more than 7 minutes. And specific locations on the planet only experience them once every 4 centuries or so.
What is the origin of the word monsoon?
The word monsoon comes from the Arabic word mawzan, meaning season.
Can I get a cold from being out in cold weather?
The fact that it is cold will not, in itself, cause you to become sick. The reason why colds become more prevalent in winter is that people tend to stay indoors more, where they come into contact more frequently with other people. some of whom may be carrying viruses or illness-causing bacteria. Also, indoor heating systems run constantly in colder regions. Anyway, and the environment inside homes and buildings may not be all that healthy. Germs can proliferate in, for example, air filters and air ducts that have not been properly cleaned. Sometimes, too, people can be exposed to too much carbon monoxide. And the early symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning can mimic those of a common cold. To help avoid winter colds, it is wise to wash your hands regularly and, when in public areas, try and keep your hands away from your mouth, nose, and eyes. Recent studies have also shown that a good night's sleep, 8 hours, helps to reduce the chances of getting a cold by 66%.
Has a hurricane ever made landfall in Southern California?
While tropical storms have, rarely, reached Southern California, there is no record of a hurricane ever reaching the coastline there. A deadly tropical storm took 45 lives in 1939, and Tropical Storm Kathleen caused lots of flooding on September 10, 1976.
Why is there a hole in the ozone layer?
The ozone layer is not evenly distributed around the planet. It is thicker around the equator and nearby latitudes and thinner as one progresses north and south. This is true of the Earth's atmosphere in general because the planet's spin causes the planet to bulge slightly around the middle. The gravitational pull is consequently a little weaker and the atmosphere thickens. At the poles, the atmosphere is thinner, including the ozone layer. In addition, because ozone is dependent upon the interaction of sunlight and oxygen, there is naturally less ozone at the poles. Furthermore, ozone layers fluctuate naturally over time due to numerous factors affecting climate and sunlight levels. Since 1975, scientists believe that more than 33% of the ozone layer has disappeared. There is a seasonal factor to the reduction in ozone at any given time during the year, too. At different times, the ozone layer naturally declines or rises. But scientists also know that chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which are used for air conditioning, aerosol sprays, and halon in fire extinguishers, along with methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, NO2, are broken down by UV radiation, freeing carbon, chlorine, and nitrogen atoms that then react with ozone molecules and destroy them. CFCs are particularly bad because they last so long in the atmosphere. One CFC molecule can destroy 100,000 molecules of ozone.